Greetings and salutations, dudes and dudettes. I bid you welcome to a new Raging Rackage series. I welcome you all to Pizza Dudes Got 30 Seconds. What is the goal of Pizza Dudes Got 30 Seconds? Well, we're going to be looking at some more obscure turtle comics, and I really hope you can enjoy these comics and hopefully find them at your local comic book stores. Initially, I was going to be discussing Rick Veitch's contributions to the Turtle franchise, but unfortunately, a real-life circumstance happened involving a creator who I was planning on discussing. That would be the unfortunate passing of comic book legend Peter David. Now, to briefly vent, Peter David is one of my all-time and personal favorite comic book creators of all time. This guy's reach is limitless, folks. The guy has created so many iconic characters and reinvented so many characters also. Whether that be Aquaman, creating Spider-Man 2099, Young Justice, or even having awesome runs on Spider-Man in his own right. But for me personally, my all-time favorite creation, or I should say run, from Peter David would be his tenure on The Incredible Hulk. Now, this was a 12-year labor of love by Peter David, where he took what was still a pretty solid series. Now, Peter David took the baton from John Byrne after his very brief run on the character, and just decided to flip everything upside down by bringing back the Grey Hulk. Grey Hulk would be a phenomenal character, and of course we have the iconic art by Todd McFarlane, but he would eventually evolve into his own character, known as Joe Fixit, and he'd have many, many adventures. Peter David would also go on to create Professor Hulk. Peter David would also go on to pen my personal favorite Hulk storyline, The Incredible Hulk, Future Imperfect, a phenomenal time travel storyline involving the present Hulk going to fight a future version of himself, the Maestro. And last but not least, a very special memory to me, as this would be a random dollar box find. And of course, I would go on to discover it would have Peter David's signature inside the book, which was a really awesome experience when I had found this in a comic book store, and it's still something that I treasure to this very day. Now, I actually do have the comic where it was announced that we were getting the 2003 revival. Also, shout out Jim Lawson for signing this. Really cool guy. Jim, you are a freaking legend, dude. It was really interesting to see the Super Turtles from this comic actually later go on to appear in the actual show itself. Pete would announce in this issue that the Turtles were coming back with a vengeance, getting a new game from Konami and a new comic book based off the series from Dreamwave. Now, Dreamwave was a smaller company that was around back in the early 2000s, primarily putting out Transformers comics, which were pretty awesome in their own right. I can only speculate why Pete put the book at Dreamwave instead of publishing it through Mirage. I can only speculate due to the workload that Pete was taking in along with the rest of the Mirage staff at the time. So putting it at Dreamwave was an understandable choice in my eyes. Now, Peter David would have a very interesting history with the Turtles, as him and Archie Goodwin would actually have a meeting with Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman to discuss publishing the Turtles over at Epic. Now, Epic Comics was a brand of Marvel Comics which allowed independent creators to create new characters, and they would be entitled to majority of the revenue from said character. Now, the meeting between everyone went smoothly, but Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman would decline the offer to publish the Turtles over at Epic Comics. Peter David would still be a fan of the franchise, and the comic would debut in June of 2003, and unfortunately really wouldn't last too long. The initial 4 issues were very unique in the fact that Pete brought out a very interesting aspect of the show, and seeing aspects of the initial episodes from a new perspective. Issue 1 would focus on 2 boys who were witness to the Turtles' initial mutation and the accident that caused that. One grew up on the straight and narrow and ended up becoming a cop. Another one ended up becoming a member of the Purple Dragons gang, which I think is a brilliant storytelling opportunity, where I love going back to that initial mutation and seeing how, like the title of the episode says, things change. 2 ends up focusing on April's perspective, and it's a very nice issue seeing how this was during the time of the classic and infamous quote from the original X-Men movie, "Oh, would you rather be wearing yellow spandex?" Now, I think some shows and franchises use this as a way to punch down at earlier iterations, but in my opinion, from the 2003 series, anytime that older elements were invoked, I do think there was a measure of love from the writers, knowing, yes, it was a goofier incarnation, yes, it wasn't Peter Laird's favorite, but still it had a huge impact on making people aware of who the Turtles were. As I was saying, this would focus on April and her need to know the truth and why she would decide, hey, Baxter is quite a sussy individual. I wonder why a bunch of Mousers are going offline. And of course, you can't have a April O'Neil story without having the classic "can we keep her" moment. Issue 3 would end up focusing on Baxter, and again, Baxter never changed. I do really like this issue as it does plant the seed of Baxter's obsessive personality, and it really does highlight and give some very interesting hindsight. Even though these characters were still being developed, it would really shine a light on further aspects of their characters and later developments of the series, as it really shows the fact that Baxter was pretty much the same, just nobody was dismembering him each and every week for his egotistical failures. Issue 4 would focus on Casey, and this is probably my favorite, as, again, this would be a great perspective into Casey's mindset, expanding upon his backstory, even mentioning the fact that he may have brain damage, and this would even come back later in the Mirage books as a plot point. And I really do like how the ending of the issue does show, though being very brash and arrogant, definitely is somebody who is capable of change. And yeah, he is definitely had the seed planted of change in him. There is still a lot of work to be done with Casey. Now, the final 3 stories of this run would be completely unique tales, and they would hammer in the fact that the Turtles' lives are pretty darn incompatible with most people's lives, outside of April and Casey, and a couple of other people in the 2003 universe. Issue 5 would deal with Raph trying to get some credit. I think it would plant the seeds of further episodes where we would see a more soft side of Raph, especially that one episode with him with a blind woman. But it really does go to show, as much as the Turtles do crave a little bit of confirmation bias and a little bit of thanks for their actions, most people would not understand their struggles. And issue 6 and 7 do follow up on this story in a very unique way, with Leo teaching a kid, and this would kind of interfere with some of the later lore established in the series of them not wanting to be senseis based off their experience of training Casey. Even Splinter does scold Leo later in the issue for being pretty stupid and saying, "Hey, pal, we have 2 humans that know our existence. Adding to that pile is only going to cause us more trouble." But thankfully, the situation is resolved, and the human boy who was helping out, does learn a lesson, and is better off for learning the lessons that Leo had taught him. Now, this is where we get into the unfortunate side of this series. Issue 7 would be the very last published issue. And, of course, in said issue, like all comics...
Hans, stop breaking my balls.
There you go, Hans Briggs!
Of course, like most of the issues, had a teaser for what was coming next. T4. A depiction of my arch nemesis, the Turtlebot of the 03 series. Now, the Turtlebot was a weird can of worms as a character. Like most characters during the early stages of the 03 series, there was no defined or no concrete lore with this character. He was a figure. People were allowed to use him. First off, it would be in the 03 video game. I'm gonna assume this was supposed to come out next, and then later on the Turtlebot would get featured in the series proper. But this seemed like a really interesting issue with the Turtlebot, but unfortunately the series was canceled after issue 7. I really don't know why. I can only speculate. Dreamwave was not doing financially too good. The issues were collected, and some pages from issue 8 were archived in that book, but unfortunately, this series is pretty tough to track down. Though recently I was made aware from a recent Tadaruzu video that most, if not all, are still thankfully available on Amazon Digital, Kindle, I don't know what the hell they're calling it now. In conclusion, guys, if you have the chance to read this run of Turtle Comics, definitely track it down. It's definitely some of my favorite work of Peter David that definitely gets slept on. And again, even in the greater Turtle scheme, it is pretty slept on. Like I said before, it is kind of tough to track down some of these comics, but I do know in the Best Of series, there have been a couple of reprints. So in conclusion, I hope this is a very concise appreciation of Peter David's forever and lasting legacy. Of course, it sucks losing Peter David, but thankfully he will live on forever through the characters and comics that he created. So with that being said, guys, like, subscribe, praise the mighty Jimmy, and have yourself a fantastic day. And always remember, forgiveness is divine, but never pay full price for a late pizza.